Dust may be settling now that the Cape Town strike or taxi strike has been called off, but it's had a lasting effect on the Western Cape economy. The retail sector hasn't been spared as employees in the sector couldn't commute, creating problems, of course, for both workers and businesses. The situation created operational challenges and also disrupted the retail sector's stability. So what has been the violent strike's main impact on the retail sector? For more on this, I'm joined by Broll Property Group CEO, Malcolm Horne. Thank you so much for joining me, Malcolm, this evening. Of course, we know that we've seen the pictures on social media as well as here in Johannesburg. You know, shelves empty in some stores in Cape Town. You know, this has really had a devastating impact on the retail industry. But you know, maybe just briefly explain to us how this taxi strike has impacted the retail industry.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for inviting me. You know, I think if you think of the retail environment, you've got to think of shoppers, you've got to think of security, you've got to think of service, and you've obviously got to think of suppliers. So this taxi strike affected shoppers because shoppers didn't want to come into the retail centres. It affected security because there was a lot of intimidation, and the environments became very unsafe for people to move around in. It affected service because a lot of the employees didn't go to work. And of course, it affected the suppliers because the supply chain couldn't supply goods to the retail stores. So in our Broll environment, where we manage about 459 shopping centres across the continent, I mean, we've seen a spike in the Western Cape where the turnovers dropped for that period of time due to the factors that I've just mentioned to you.
And when we look at figures, can you maybe roughly estimate how, you know, or tell us, you know, what was the cost of the strike economically?
Look, I think we can't estimate the cost of the strike because turnover figures are not in yet. But the reality of it is we would monitor the shopping centres by footfall, and we saw a dramatic decline in footfall over the period of the strike, and mainly due to people not being able to commute in the greater city of Cape Town.
Yeah, and let's talk about the, you know, if something like this is to happen again, you know, this would obviously have another devastating impact on the Cape Town economy.
Yeah, sure. But I do think the retail sector was definitely more prepared for it. I think, you know, we ran through the same or similar scenario in KZN a while ago. And I think the entire property sector, especially us, I mean, we created a 24-hour call center, risk services. I mean, we've been really prepping for eventualities like this in the retail environment. And I think as have many of my peers in the sector been doing the same thing. So the sector is actually ready from an asset operational planning point of view, from a resource competence point of view. But I mean, the reality is we still need to create environments of shopping that people want to and can come to spend their money.
And what measures would you say, if one can even, you know, put in place some measures, what can shoppers and what can shops and retail groups do to make sure that, you know, they keep business going if they can when something like this happens?
I think the key to it, for me, there's a few elements there. I mean, communication is the key one. So, you know, often you need to communicate correctly to the right people in the community, the shoppers, the retailers. So a whole ecosystem of who uses a shopping center, correct objective communication and quick communication. Also, there are large plans of collaboration with law enforcement, with local communities. So more and more, I think you're finding an ecosystem being created of credible people and organizations communicating and keeping one another communicated with, so that we can actually keep the assets safe and make sure that the people that use the assets is also very safe.
And let's maybe talk about the impacts this has on communities, especially those who are very vulnerable.
Absolutely. I think we saw that. I mean, we saw because suppliers couldn't get through basic commodities like bread, milk. I mean, all of that is a real effect on the most vulnerable. And I think also we saw in Bellville, where you've got your commuter station, where 180,000 people go through that station. So I think we're talking formal retail. But if you look at the informal retail sector, where often it is, you know, people spend their money on the produce for the day and actually make money from the day to spend tomorrow in the informal retail sector. I mean, this taxi strike was called on the spur of the moment. There was no pre-warning. So I think in the informal sector, we had a lot more people taking knocks in the short term.
Thank you so much for your time, Malcolm. Great, talking to you about this. Of course, a devastating impact that the taxi strike has had on the Cape Town economy, especially retail groups being mostly affected by this. But, like you said, there are measures that can be put in place to prevent something like this from happening and to keep business going in some way or form. And when those who are most vulnerable aren't affected in such a big way.